Welcome to Emotional Sobriety. How's everybody doing this morning? How you hanging in there?
I'm disappointed. I just found out that the Super Bowl is not today, and it's next week, and so I have some time on my hands.
Do you really look forward to that every year?
Oh
I'm
God,
not a sports guy.
Oh yeah, Super Bowl. Love it. I'm not a baseball guy, I found I'm not the only one who does this with baseball. I'm like a September, October fan.
That's me.
Because there's too much baseball. There's so many games. There's too much baseball to watch. So I just see who's still standing in September and October, and decide who I'm going to root for in the World Series. I love watching the World Series.
I do too. I do the same thing. I do that. Sometimes I do it with the NBA too, not as religiously, but I'm the same. But for football, I get more caught in the season because it is a limited number of games.
Yep.
And I grew up in Chicago. We were big Bears fans, everybody.
Well, there's that, but that's where you can also this is family of origin work. Watch us make a segue into therapy. It's like I grew up in. Why am I an NFL guy? Well, because I grew up in an NFL family. You know, we worshiped. We did, and I grew up in Texas, so we weren't fans. We worshiped the Cowboys.
Oh, that's right.
You know, and of course we had the Oilers that became the Titans. So I ended up inheriting them over here in Tennessee. But you know. And I'm not very much of a college football watcher. It's like, but I know other people who do. But if you just check back, that's where they come from. It's like it's one of those things that we just sometimes think we're making decisions about things in life, and we're not. We're just doing what is normal, natural, what we've grown up with.
Yeah, it's the trance that we get put in, right?
That's right.
It's not that's bad. I mean, listen, we had a lot of good time. I enjoyed hating the Cowboys.
Oh yeah, I'm enjoying that now.
Throwback days. I mean,
we loved Roger. You know, you couldn't top Dandy Don though. I mean, Don Meredith. I mean, it's like he's so long ago, people hardly even mention him anymore. But I'm going like, no. But Meredith and Craig Morton are two of my favorite. They were my heroes as a kid. Yeah,
that's right. They were America's team, man. The decades from the 60s and 70s they dominated.
Yeah, I think so. It's like it was but you think about the America's team thing, that's just good marketing.
Yeah,
I mean, somebody came up with that you know, that's in the back rooms where they're marketing things and going like, okay, let's do this.
No, you're right, but yep. They've been a phenomenal football team. They really have. It's been fun.
I was just going to jump in because I'm excited about the theme you guys suggested for the episode today, radical honesty, because it flies in the face of so much of my lived experience. I was like radically dishonest, I suppose. And I living a double life and, just kind of hiding all these like behaviors and, really like feeling inauthentic in every human interaction I was having. That's shifted a lot over the last few years, but man, I have a lot of ways to go with that, I think. How do you guys come to it at this point?
I think, first of all, Patrick, let's just acknowledge what you just said here. It's that living a life of radical dishonesty. I think I can identify with that, especially, after coming to the program, then that my consciousness started to shift. But before, coming to the program, there was this public persona, right? This social social image that I put out. And then there was a very private image that was very different than the public image. And like you, the incongruence between the two was huge. I wasn't the same person that I put out there, right? That I think I had to be to get people to like me, to be able to be accepted in the world, to belong, to be loved, all of that other stuff. And so there was this deep sense of, if you really knew who I am, you wouldn't like me, you wouldn't love me, you wouldn't want me to be around, right? That kind of a thing. And so it was always living with this dread of being found out, to be this phony, because I was such a big phony. So I
Right.
totally relate to that, man. And I think that split is common.
Yeah, it's yeah, and actually I was thinking about the Thursday night group too. I think one of the things I was talking about the other night was that what I call the behavioral value split, where your expressed values and your behavioral values are very, very different. And addiction is caused by addiction, but it's like but it's caused by lots of things. I mean, this is not just you don't have to be a substance addict to have that. This is really truly a way of looking at the where emotional sobriety is needed, is where, because that's to me bringing those two together, my behavioral values with my express values, it's one of if we were going to make a list right now of just things that are I don't know if they're definitions, but at least characteristics of emotional sobriety, that would be at the top of the list. Congruence. We've talked about congruence a lot. It's interesting you say that, because when I was back in those days, for me, I way down deep, there's no doubt, unconsciously, I had the exact same thing where it's like, I'm a piece of shit, and I was yet to discover, consciously, my should monster, and basically my defense system during my drinking days was I really bought my own press releases, man. It's like I was, I thought I was. It's amazing to me. And I was for the most part of my career, unlike you started your career in addiction work because you were a recovering addict. I didn't. I was a drinking using person who was working in addiction programs and later developing programs, and was actually the clinical director of a treatment program when my wife suggested that and I say suggested, she didn't use that, that I stop, basically she said, you get into recovery right now or move out tomorrow. So that was her suggestion. And it's like, so all of a sudden, in one fell swoop, that incongruence was just dropped into my lap, both personally and in my career. Yeah. Painful.
I find that the idea of radical honesty is met with skepticism, sometimes ridicule, because and the way that I respond to that is, I think of the idea of radical honesty similarly to emotional sobriety, and that it's something that we're always moving towards, but there's always a tendency to kind of slip into a kind of false self, or it's more of kind of like it's something that needs to be massaged through a life. What do you guys think about that?
Well, let's define radical honesty. Because I one of the things I'm a big believer in is when there's differences, or you say when somebody's against something or they criticize it, one of the first things to do anytime is to check your terms and find out, are we talking about the same? Because so many arguments people have in general are I mean, how many times, Alan, have you ever been in a session with a couple and you're sitting there going like, these people don't actually disagree about what they're talking about, they're just using different words for it. And it's not often I could just use my English major to help somebody heal a piece of their relationship, but a lot of times it is true. And radical honesty is that term is scary. Yeah, it is going to bring up resistance in people. So what? And I don't know know that I have a definition for radical honesty. I mean, I have a sense of what I believe it is and how I think I practice it, but I don't know if it's the same as your guys. So let's each define it.
So what I would say is, first of all, the kind of honesty, radical honesty we're talking about, begins with self-honesty.
Yes.
It's not an honesty, a lot of people think of honesty as in relationship to others. Well, listen, that's important, but I can't be radically honest with you if I have no sense of what's going on with me.
Right.
So knowing who I am and what's going on and having some insight into my basic nature becomes such an important part of being radically honest. I think we could tie this into what's happening on Thursday nights. And by the way, at the end of this podcast today, Patrick will give you guys the Zoom code for the Thursday night meeting and the password. If you haven't been attending that, my goodness, the discussion now, the workshop has changed so that we're now walking through the 12 steps and talking about authentic honesty, or what we're calling, authentic self-esteem, which is really grounded in humility, and authenticity, right? And we've been going through the 12 steps, and the way we're doing it is that Tom Rutledge joins me, my colleague here in the podcast, but we're also joined by our good friend and colleague Roger Andes and Herb Kagan. And we're having these, to me, incredibly stimulating and penetrating discussions about the steps and self-esteem and emotional sobriety. And, Patrick is kind enough to donate his time to create video archives. And those are also posted on a YouTube channel, and he'll give you that information so you guys can catch up if you choose to join it. But look, on a regular basis, we're getting between 150 and 200 people on Thursday nights. And the workshops become incredibly popular. And you did an amazing workshop a couple weeks ago talking about step 5. And for those of you that are not in AA, step 5 says we admitted to ourselves, to another human being, and to God, the exact nature of our problems. And this comes after step 4, which is making a searching and fearless moral inventory.
And what you just said takes us right back to where you started, which is the one I overlooked for so long in step 5 is admitted to ourselves.
Yes.
And that's the self-honesty. And it's like, I love that I did not think to go. I mean, I believe that with all my heart. We kind of just put little parts of ourselves in, let some people know about this part. Some people know about this part. But what we really are afraid of deep down and very much unconsciously is for somebody to know all of us.
Wow. Listen, so everybody hear what he's saying. And listen, the other thing, Tom, and I think you'll really, see for your experience with this, and my experience has been, my ability to be honest with myself changes so much with time and circumstance.
Yes.
The more mature I become, the more honest I get, the more I listen to my curiosity and delve into some of my experience and unpack it. I give you an example of it. Let's say Patrick does something, not that he ever would, but let's say Patrick does, and I'm mad at him. I'm angry. So before, honesty would have been to say, what's going on, Patrick? How could you do that? You're really pissing me off. All right, now just listen to that. It's a total externalization of my problems. Is like whatever Patrick did, is the reality is he shouldn't have done it, and that have a right to be angry with him because I don't even realize, first of all, if I'm angry, it means something's off with me. Right. So at that time, honesty might have meant sharing my feelings that I'm angry. That might have been what I thought was radical honesty at one point in time. I'm pissed off at you. How could you treat me that way? Or how could you do that? I thought our friendship meant more, and all this other bullshit I would do, right? I think of all that as bullshit right now. Some of you may not, but I do.
But sharing that I feel angry, it can be a part of our honesty and our emotional thing. But what you're describing is blaming, just that reflex that we have to blame. Right. So
that's what I was going to say, that there's a way I can talk about my anger. That's radical honesty. Wow, I'm aware. So contrast this. Patrick, how could you do that? I'm pissed off at you. Versus, right? Wow, I'm aware that all of a sudden I started to feel a lot of anger. I wonder what's going on with me that I'm feeling that way. Now, that to me today is radical honesty. That's very different. And then I start to go, I realize that you violated some rule I have. And I've never even told you I have this rule. And yet I expect you to live up to it. See, so now what I'm doing is I'm being honest with my experience, but I'm able to talk about my experience and own it 100%. I'm not saying there's a part of me that's responsible for my anger and you have a part. No, I'm 100% responsible for the feeling I'm experiencing, and I'm 100% responsible for how I express it.
Right. Right. Those two things. And that does not, and this is one of the things I always want people to know, that does not mean in that situation that we are, and hear me out through this, that we're letting Patrick off the hook. First of all, we don't have the authority to put him on a hook or let him off the hook. Okay. That authority rests only with him in the work we're doing. It's like, however, by talking it through in that way, in that honest way, if Patrick is also in the process of recovery, he can also become curious and say, what was it that from me that triggered that for you? And you say, oh, you did. So he then has the opportunity to say, to go do his own work with that. And that might even include, when we're wrong, promptly admit it kind of thing, where he would say, you know what, I wish I hadn't done that. And I think that was a mistake on my part too. So I apologize. Good, fine. But it's like, that's just cleaning up the mess a little bit as you go. But ultimately it's, God, I have clients who get so caught up into what, well, they don't think of it this way, but it's revenge thinking. It's like, I got to get this person back, and I've got to get them to understand, what they've done to me, how they've hurt me. It's like,
Well, could you explain a bit about, like, how does this process, like, how can it be freeing? Like, what is the liberatory quality of it?
I'm not so much stumped by your question. I guess I am being stumped by your question.
It's nice to have somebody to blame,
Well, you mean, why do we externalize and blame people? That's maybe a different question.
Maybe,
yeah. Is that what you're at? Are you asking
what he's asking? What is the benefit of blaming others? And the benefit of blaming others is I keep intact this idea that I'm not the problem.
Yeah.
You see, there's a whole, what would
there's lots of payoff there as long as you remain unconscious to your own process. One of the things we do, Allen and I do for a living, we do when we get together in groups like Thursday night, whatever, is we raise awareness for people. And awareness fucks everything up. It's like bringing up the lights. It's like, if you as an old alcoholic, I'll use the thing of, have you ever been in your favorite dive bar at the end of the night and they bring the lights up and you realize, oh God, this place is this is horrible. And it's like, but you love it, and as long as the lights are down. But basically, yeah, when you bring the lights up, then when Allen he's working his program, then basically when he catches himself blaming you, that's when he pulls back and says, wait a minute, this is about my own expectation.
Well,
a lot of times you have to interrupt yourself. First of all, I want people to know you don't just naturally go to this. I mean, it's like we have benefit of just sitting here thinking this stuff through and giving examples. It's like, it's not like the first thought that's going to show up in your mind is like, what's wrong with me that I'm feeling this way? It's like, my reflexes are still the same. If Patrick triggers my anger, my first thought is, fuck you, Patrick. It's what we do with it afterwards. Wait a minute. I need to come back, and then to do that process you were talking about, Allen.
Yeah.
See, what I was going to say, Patrick, when you said what you said, see, there's such a prohibition in our culture, right? That says, the way Roger started out his discussion of step 5 is, who wants to be that honest? Right, Why would somebody really want to get that honest with themselves and look at all the things that the exact nature of their wrongs? Most people won't do that. And there's a reason for it, right? Is that it's like we protect this image that we have of ourselves, to sometimes to a great detriment. You see it show up in relationships all the time. Thom and I'll see a couple just continuing to quibble and bicker about an issue, and what's underneath it is trying to make the other person wrong so you can be right. And see, that's the stuff that really keeps us from, enriching our experience with each other. And what I would call nourishing our experience with each other. So the prohibition against being honest is great. I get to walk around with the illusion, we might even call it a delusion, that the problem isn't me, it's you. And see, and you'll see that people do quibble about this all the time, because there's something about that. If I'm honest about this, I'm taking something away from my self-esteem. Dr. Kempler used to have the best line in the world for that. When people would say, God, if I admit I was wrong, I really feel like I'm losing. He says that's a good thing to lose. That's a good that's a good form of defeat. He says what you're giving up when you're losing that is this false pride that you've got to be somehow perfect. So what you're catching with what you said, Patrick, is the shift in consciousness between who I am and who I want to be. And what is the possibility, right? Because when we say who we want to be, what we're talking about, and we've kind of put it in this framework several times, is recovering our humanity.
As you get honest with yourself, a lot of times, I mean, very often, I think people will, when we start asking people about what they desire, what they want, what they had in mind earlier in their lives, is you'll just see a blank look on their face sometimes, and they'll say, I don't even know what I want. And see, that's radical honesty.
Well,
that's saying this is
radical honesty. Right.
There's a blank space here. And of course, what that feels scary, but as guides, what you and I will say to them is, no, this it's scary, yes, but it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
If
somebody sits with that, this has been my experience, Tom. So when somebody says that and it's genuine, and they're not using that as an avoidance strategy.
Right.
I don't know. Right. Or I'm afraid, because I'll ask somebody if I suspect it, I'll say, are you saying you don't know, or that you're afraid to say what's going on? Because that's a big difference between the two. Right.
Right. But I'll say sometimes I'll say, look right under the I don't know and tell me what's there.
What's there. So if I say, all right, well, let's sit with that for a minute. That is the reality of your experience with yourself, that you don't know yourself. What is it like to not know? And oftentimes somebody will start crying. God, I feel so disconnected. I feel so much a robot in my life, an automaton, right? That kind of a thing. And it touches a deep pain, and that pain begins the recovery of themselves, because now they feel the alienation from who they are. And now the integration starts to occur by just owning what they're experiencing.
It's in Simple Truth, the first book I ever wrote. I refer to this as divine emptiness, and the definition of divine emptiness in what I put down was these are we'll meet those places all along. We can still meet. We can still have me in one of those tomorrow or later today. But divine emptiness to me is just defined as a time where we know so much more about who we are not than who we are. Yeah. And very often it's like what we're talking about is we know so much more about what we don't want than what we actually do want. And and see, here's the thing. I have a friend who always says, well, why is it divine? And he says, I know why it's divine, because it scares the hell out of you. It's like, well, that's pretty clever. It's like, but the truth is, as human beings, this is what I got from writing the book on fear, just spending time with that subject. We fear uncertainty, openness, not knowing more than we fear anything else in the world. We will often opt for a negative certainty over an uncertainty. And so part of what we do is it's a kind of a corny line in our business, but we help people hold that space open. And that's what I love what you're saying. When you say just stop and be there with it.
Stop and be there with it. And look, but I want to go off of that. And then I want to say something we're so complex too, because we want certainty, but we also want novelty. We're very interesting beings. It's really, don't try to pigeonhole yourself, because you're there's many sides to you. We're just like, there's a committee. We talk about it all the time. There's a guy in there that would love novelty and love to go on an adventure and stimulation. And there's another part that wants certainty, that wants stability. So we're complex. But I want to go off of what you said about saying what you don't want sometimes is beginning to discover what you want. Very important. People don't get that. Think about development. Is one of the first words out of a child's mouth is what? No. That's right. How come? Because it's the only thing available to us at that time to differentiate us from the other person.
I'm not you. Yeah.
I'm not you. And so the process of differentiation starts with a rejection of some information, idea,
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
something like that. It's like your first breath. Remember, I'll talk about all the time. Our first breath is our first step towards differentiation. No is our first psychological step towards differentiation. I don't want to eat right now. No. And the baby will just pull away from the nipple or the bottle and say, no, I've had enough. I'm full. Right? That'll be the first experience. Or to go hold the child doesn't want to be held. How the parent meets that no becomes very important, because if you meet that no, your child's no, and make them feel bad about saying that they don't want something, what do you think has been set in motion?
Yeah.
A denial of one's
self rejection. It's like you learn I don't know, because the authority here is telling me I'm wrong about that. You don't have you don't have the conscious thought, but that's just what your body is learning.
No to this thing, I should say yes. And so now we're thrown into this confusion. If I want to please this person, I've got to deny what I'm experiencing and accept their reality.
Right.
That's at the core of, that's where I struggle with radical honesty. I think the most is just that fundamental, I don't want to hurt somebody by saying something true that would, my truth that might make them feel bad. And that happens all over a lot of my relationships.
That came. So now you're understanding where that came from, right? It's how no is met in your family, and how like it was met in my family, that you're supposed to cooperate and go along with. That's why I have so much trouble with our school system the way it is. Who was it that wrote Animal Farm, Tom? Do you remember that book?
George Orwell. Yeah.
Oh my God. What a good guide for how do you develop an educational system that works for everyone. If you haven't read, what's it called? Animal
Farm, George Orwell. Yeah.
It's a brilliant book about people, education, and it's an incredible what he uses the metaphor, right, of all these animals going to school. And when the lesson's on flying, all of the flying creatures do wonderfully well. The bunny doesn't do too good flying.
Not good.
Neither does the pig or the dog or the cat. But when it comes to running, the birds are terrible at it. Right? They can't trap like the four-legged creatures can. But his whole thing is that we throw people into a classroom and treating them like a homogenous thing, like they're all the same. It was such a wonderful book, man.
Well, and inside that system, however, I would say the best teachers I know, and it's not necessarily an easy system for them to work in, but the best teachers I know do not do that. It's like I have a client who's a teacher, very young ones, and I think just listening to her stories sometimes about her work, I just have such admiration for what she deals with and who she deals with, and how she respects those little ones. If you're a bunny, I don't need you to fly.
That's a person who's mature and has a consciousness that's differentiated. See, if we go back to looking at Orwell's idea, what he was capturing was, in our society, we want people to think one way and be one way because we think that's the way we're going to relate to people. We think that that's the way that we're going to be connected. Like in a relationship, I was working with this one couple. The pressure they put on each other to think the same way was incredible. They leave no room for any differences. And what happens when you do that is you can't really have a deep intimacy, because intimacy occurs by two people being different, not by being the same, but by really, really connecting to who that person is, not as a projection of what you want them to be so you feel comfortable,
right?
But to experience them as they are. Wow, that's rare. That is so.
That's a great way to put that too, because I just think about this, and I'm pretty sure this would apply to you and Jess, but I think about my wife Dee Dee and myself, and I thought, wow, if and maybe very likely, in the past before lots of therapy, I was doing some of that. It's that, but I'm thinking, wow, if we have to think alike, not like just, and we're not talking about content, we're talking about process. If we have to think alike to be okay, it's like we're up shit creek, because we do not think alike. We do not have the same processing system. And one of the things I've come to, I don't know if I've said it here or not, but it's like, talk about radical. I've come to this in just the last few years, maybe the last couple of years, is this wonderful insight and this wonderful awareness that I don't need Dee Dee to change at all for me to love her. It's like, I can have my preferences about this or that, whatever. I could be irritated about that. I'd be okay, whatever. But I put it in perspective. It's like that. Those things are not important. What's important is whether or not we love each other, and that we and in that love is respect. Demonstrated love is respect. It's like that's
intimacy right there, man. That respect of those differences, and not demanding that other person do things the way you think they should or how you want them to. And there's nothing wrong with asking for it. There's nothing wrong with me telling I'd really like this. But if I demand it, it's a whole different deal.
Well, and going back to Patrick saying, there's nothing wrong with somebody when we ask to say no. And I want to make this point for Patrick and any listener who's identified with this is this just a little semantic thing that helped me a whole lot. I make a distinction in my head between hurt and harm. Okay. And because when I'm making a decision about something, saying something that I need to say or doing something I need to do, and somebody says that I feel hurt by that, I look first to see if I've done something that is potentially harmful to them. Yes. And if I have, that's when the 10th step goes into work. When we're wrong, promptly admit it. You know what? I did fuck that up and I apologize to you. But more often than not, what's happening is that you're getting bumped into something that you don't want because I made a decision that basically does that, but there's nothing wrong with my decision. And that means you can be hurt and I don't have to feel guilty. I can feel like I have empathy. I can say, that's where you really can say, I'm sorry that you feel that way. It's like, but I'm not really apologizing for what I did because I didn't do anything wrong. I just was myself.
Such a great point.
Yeah. But it helps me to know that my value system is such that when I determine that I actually have harmed somebody, that's on me. Right. That's not where that's not like, oh well, that's their karma. They've got to do it. No, they got to do whatever they're going to do with it. But I need to clean my side of the street. And if I've done something that I think is wrong to you, Allen, then I need to be able to make amends to that.
That's right.
Well, what you describe having attained in your relationship, that's a hell of a victory. I hope that take some time to celebrate that.
It's a lot easier. Let me tell you, it really is. It's like I think about the amount of time spent obsessing about trying to figure things out, or back in the days when we would do the endless arguments into the night, it's like, exhausting. And it's like, and we can keep experimenting with you, Patrick. Our experiment here is how much of this can we just pass on to you directly, and how much of it do you have to just get to be an old guy before you can do it?
Well, hey, give me some experience, strength, and hope. Where does the radical honesty, like where is that the most challenging for you these days?
With myself is understanding. Like recently, I think I mentioned to you guys before that I've engaged in some personal therapy now for the last couple years. I think it's been, and pretty frequently. It's almost on a weekly basis, and I've gotten so much out of it. She's very psychoanalytic, so it's a very different kind of therapy than I've been in. But yet she's also she's one of the new psychoanalytic folks that's much more into the relational dynamics. So she's very present with me, and which is just perfect for me. I mean, I feel so seen and heard and supported and challenged at the same time. It's not like she puts up with my bullshit, because she doesn't. She calls me out, which I find of value too. I mean, don't like it at times, but I find it of value. But one of the things that I hadn't realized is how, when my father died, and this is about the self-honesty now, how I withdrew to such a point where through my whole life, I've felt such a disconnection from people. I didn't want to be connected. I think that's been changing. I mean, I think it's evident in, I really try to be in relationship to and create a community in my life today. My relationship with you, Thom, I think is an example of that. Roger's always been in the inner circle, but he was the only one for a long time. But I've really opened myself up more. But it was starting with realizing how alone and lonely I felt for so long in my life. And being honest with that is just, I'd sit in the sessions with her, and because I've cried a lot about it now, the pain is not as in my foreground or in the foreground of my consciousness, but I would sob for 30 minutes at a deep level in our sessions, just feeling of how alone and lonely I was for so long, and wouldn't go share. I mean, look, my sponsor, Thom, said it took me 20 years. You guys met Thom. Recall, it took me 20 years before I talked to him about my experiences in Vietnam. 20 years. That's just a little bit of a window into what you're asking, Patrick, in terms of my ability to be honest with myself, and that I really needed to be connected and wanted to be connected and didn't want to because I didn't want to get hurt again, has been something that's been more and more revealing itself to me.
I think that I like your response to that, and I think that because one of the things I thought about first, and you kind of validated it for me, is that and I'm not saying that there might be some exceptions to this, but none come to mind right now. Is that once I can discover it for myself, this is part of just experience and having done this for so long. There really isn't anything that I have a real difficult time sharing with other people. I don't feel threatened by that. I actually, that's been reframed in my life to where the idea of sharing, people compliment people on being vulnerable. It's like you go like, you know what? I mean, vulnerability is expressing especially from a vulnerable place, is a strength. It's not a weakness. And it's, I'll see up on the comments a lot of times when one of us is talking about some of our own stuff, that they appreciate the vulnerability. And I appreciate that to the degree that we're modeling something that they can do themselves. But and Patrick, I mean, you can speak to that too, because even on our podcast, you are regularly very vulnerable. Yeah. It's like, my guess would be, you could true false this one, is that you understand that's a strength that you have developed.
It's the thing I know I can bring that's of value to listeners, is my innate experience. Hearing Allen share that just now, I feel like I was able to understand the way that can grow a life, I think, is very beautiful.
Yeah, there you go. Well said, Patrick. I'll tell you, this emotional sobriety stuff, I'm doing some work at the Doylestown Tennis Club, as they're calling me now, their sports psychologist. But I'll tell you, I gave a talk for the holiday classic workouts that they do, clinics that they do. And I give a 10-minute little sports psychology talk in between the drill section and then the live play, right? Cool. And so I get about 30, 40 of the players. And the first talk I gave was alignment with reality. I said, if you come on this court and you are not aligned with the reality of what's going on, you are not going to play well. If you think of yourself that you can be Roger Federer out here, you're going to be sorely disappointed, deeply disappointed. I says, but even at the lower level, even if you make a mistake and you get upset with yourself, I want you to think about what you're doing. You're expecting yourself not to make any mistakes. I said, that's not how we as human beings learn. We learn through what's called a series of successive approximations. You go out, you hit the ball once, you take the feedback, your brain processes a lot of this outside of your awareness. You're not realizing all of the little adjustments that are taking place with the neurons firing and the synapses communicating at different parts of your brain, so that the next time you hit the ball, you've processed that information. Now you're going to process more. The game of tennis. Well, I can't remember the author of that. You remember the guy's name who did it, Tom?
Galloway, Tim Galloway. Yeah. I love that book.
It was what he captured. You see, he talks about self one and self two.
Yep.
Self one was just stay out of the way. It'll learn. As self two says, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you hit that ball right? I mean,
so that was long before I ever thought about the should monster. That's what self two was, and what you just, I love what you just said, that you talked about it at the tennis club, because it's what you're doing is you're the old expression, getting out of your own way. That's what you're doing, but you're actually helping them know how to cooperate with the learning. Because the critic breathing down your neck, I mean, if you hand me a piece of paper and say, write a paragraph about so-and-so, and then you look over my shoulder the whole time and don't even say anything, but you just maybe make some noises or breathe, how hard is it going to be to write that fucking paragraph? It's like, but if you just leave me alone and I'll write the paragraph, I'll do it. And what you're also talking about is just what we know neurologically is, it's just repetition. You can't learn anything without repeating it again and again and again and again. And that's what I always mean by practice makes practice. It's like, it's just a practice.
Yeah. One of the things I do when I do teach, I don't teach that often on the court. The guys try to, why don't you spend some time now teaching? We'll hire you in a minute. I've been enjoying my practice still. At some point I'll teach a few clinics there for them. But one of the things I do, if somebody's struggling, I will have them make mistakes on purpose.
I like it.
I'd say, I want you to hit this ball and I want you to hit it into the bottom of the net. Now I want you to hit it 20 feet long. And I want you to go back and forth between the two. I just want you to feel what that's like. Now try to go in the middle of that and see what happens. Unbelievable what happens when people give themselves space to make the mistake.
You actually quite literally, you create a range, for them to operate within. I love that. That's brilliant.
I'll tell you, man, instead of a play, I mean, I can't tell you how many pros will go out and if the person's making a mistake, they keep trying to get them to do the right thing. It's not a good teaching method. It's not, it builds pressure.
They're already trying to do the right thing.
The right thing. Let them do the wrong thing a few times, get it out of their system, and then they can move towards the right thing. The gift of recovery and the gift of emotional sobriety is that we can learn from our experience. We can learn from our experience. And
that's our job. That's our job, to learn from our experience. Every day, get up and learn from your experience.
Until next time.
All right, go Chiefs.
Tend your life, tend your myth. Cultivate your narrative with whomever you're with. Then with glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me. It ain't a crime to be a human. Never be ashamed to be yourself. Rest assured that whatever you're doing will entertain me like nobody else. So here's to us, my old friends, until it's time to drink the wine and break the bread again. With glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me.